Welcome everybody. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us this evening, and a very special welcome to our Tree Council supporters, and also I know we've got lots of volunteer tree wardens with us this evening, so thank you. My name is Sarah Lom and I'm CEO of the Tree Council, and I'm here with my colleagues Louise Bowe, who's project manager for Close the Gap, Talk to the Hedge, and Dominic Quinn, our comms and policy officer, and our two panelists who I will introduce in a second. For those of you who don't know us very well, who don't know the Tree Council, it's a national charity that brings everyone together for the love of trees. And this week, we're delighted to be celebrating the first ever National Hedgerow Week, brought to you with our 5 charity partners, thanks to funding from government's Green Recovery Challenge Fund. The aim is to raise awareness of all the amazing things that hedges do for us, capturing carbon, cleaning the air we breathe, providing homes and food for wildlife, and not only in the countryside, but also in our cities. We want the world to notice hedges. We'd like the nation to benefit from bigger, healthier, better connected hedgerows, and we'd like to provide more information on how to care for them and the precious wildlife that they support. And thanks to our successful bid, we not only have National Hedgerow Week, we're also going to plant 53 kilometres, which is 32 miles of new hedgerow, restore existing hedgerow, and plant 2,650 hedgerow trees and look after them once they're planted. With More Trees Nursery in Devon, which is a community seed nursery, we're training 10 apprentices. And with People's Trust for Endangered Species, we're launching a new easy app so that people can assess the health of their hedgerows. And there'll also be lots of brilliant new guidance on a new website. This is the second weekend of National Hedgerow Week, and everyone's been incredibly supportive. All of you wildlife lovers out there on your social media, thank you. BBC TV, The Times, The Telegraph, Gardener's Question Time, and even a piece in today's FT Weekend. In that piece, there's the results of a study by a Devon farmer, Rob Walton, who surveyed a short length of his hedgerow, less than 100 metres, and discovered 2,070 species twittering, buzzing, and rustling away in it. And that was not, he said, counting all the flies, just the ones that he could identify with his naked eye. And amongst those species were birds, of course. 21 priority bird species are associated with hedgerows. 13 of them have hedges as their primary habitat, which is why we're delighted to welcome 2 bird experts this evening, hedgerow heroes as well, Lucy Lapwing and Nick Atchison. Lucy is a self-described nature nerd. Her day job is with one of the UK's largest wildlife charities, and in her spare time, she uses digital media to share her love of British wildlife, whether that be her birdsong series on YouTube or her fabulous photos on Instagram and Twitter. And Nick is equally passionate about connecting people with the natural world, both in his role at Norfolk Wildlife Trust or at home with his 3-legged lurcher and his flock of rescue hens. Nick has worked in Borneo, in the Arctic, on Madagascar, in fact, with wildlife on every continent in the world. Do please put your questions into the Q&A as we go along. This evening is all about conversation, chat between our guests and with you, our wonderful audience. Please don't hold back. As we met before, we've already been talking about turtle doves, ukulele players, flying ants, and tidiness. So as you can see, it's going to be a lively conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Lucy, who's going to set us off this evening with a few thoughts of her own. Over to you, Lucy.
Thank you. Yes, and thanks so much for having me. It's really good to be here, especially on such a lovely sunny afternoon. So before I get into my little presentation that I'm going to do, which is just a very miniature little suite of birdsong lessons for anybody who doesn't know about birdsong, just a couple of thoughts about, hedges really. So I'm coming in today absolutely buzzing because I finally, after years of trying, just seen my first ever turtle dove. So literally about 2 hours ago. So it's a bird that's evaded me for a number of years, and I've tried many times to see it. And the turtle dove is, of course, an iconic species that can be quite closely associated with hedgerows. And for me, it's just such an important relationship. Is, you know, for most people, like you said, Sarah, at the beginning, something like a hedgerow is a feature that people just don't think about. You know, people walk past them every day pretty much and never really think about what they are, why they're there, what they achieve, what they are home to. And people also don't know about their status or their health as well, and the fact that, you know, we've lost many hedgerows from a lot of our landscapes. And I often like to give people a thought experiment when I'm talking to people about the challenges of modern day agriculture, and take them to a large field. And you know, we know now that fields are much larger than they used to be in the past. And say to them, imagine you're a bird and imagine you're in the middle of that field. Where are you going to go? Where's the shelter? Where's your food? Where are you going to build your nest? Just think about the texture and the depth of that landscape and what's in it, and imagine trying to survive in it. And you can see people almost start to realize how little structure there is, you know, to the world around us now in a lot of our countryside. And hedgerows used to be such an important feature of that. And, you know, we've lost so many. I'm sure many of you have seen some of the shocking aerial comparisons that several people have put around, where they've looked back at aerial photos from the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and compared them with good old Google Maps today. And you can see just the decimation of what is this amazing habitat. And for me, a hedgerow is excitement. A good hedgerow is excitement. A bad hedgerow makes me sad. And when it's all straggling, it's got nothing left and it's been flailed to death. But when you get a good, luscious, thick hedgerow with trees of different ages and they're intertwined, and it's got depth and it's got height and it's got size and bushiness, it's excitement because you know you're going to see stuff, you know you're going to encounter stuff. And it's the same with a weedy field margin. It's the same with a messy garden. People like neatness and tidiness, but for me, that messiness and texture, it means you're going to see something good, whether it's insects, whether it's exciting plants, and yes, plants are exciting, or whether it's birds. And birds are a particular passion of mine, although I don't really have a favorite of anything nature. I just like it all. But birds are really cool, they're really accessible, they're really easy to get to grips with, and we have loads of really cool ones in this country, obviously. So yeah, for me, when I see a good hedgerow, I think, what's going to be in here? Let's go and have a look. And depending on where you are in the country as well, you can see, you know, multiple different exciting species. So all of the ones I'm going to cover today in my presentation are very, very standard garden birds that you'll get in any kind of suburban garden. There's nothing too snazzy in here, no turtle doves or anything. But yeah, one thing that I like about the challenge of a hedgerow is that it's often so thick that you can't actually see the bird behind the voice if you're listening to birdsong. So it really is a good challenge because things get right in there and hide. And that's what that turtle dove was trying to do to me today until I saw it. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Bear with, because I'm on a tiny laptop. You'd think you'd be used to this by now, wouldn't you, after a year? Okay, has that come through?
Yeah, but you're not, yeah, you're on the slideshow now, I think.
Okay, yeah, is that working? Brilliant.
It's a blank blue square, but maybe, yeah, it's working.
There we go. Okay. So this is my presentation, how the heck to learn birdsong. And for me, this was something that I used to think was impossible. It was something that just seemed alien to me. And on my first day, my first job with the RSPB, my boss took me out and we stood on this woodland hilltop and we had pied flycatchers and we had redstarts and we had all sorts of birds around, and he started going, Lucy, what's that? Lucy, what's that? And I could not tell you a single bird. And I used to think, how on earth does anybody do this? So I've analysed my own process of learning birdsong, what's helped me, and I've tried to make it into like a fun, relatable way of doing so. And it's a bit of a method to the madness as well in terms of starting with the really common birds we encounter all the time, learning them, filtering them out, and then moving on to the next. So that's what we're going to try and do today. So birdsong, I'm going to cover very quickly what it is, why they do it, and how to learn it. Oh, and some mini lessons, of course. So what is birdsong? Which sounds like a really silly thing, but the noises that birds make can be broken down into lots of kind of different sections, really. So they have their songs, they have their calls, and then I've put question mark, question mark, question mark, because they make other noises as well that aren't either of these things. So if we look at song, it's generally the longer noises that a bird make. It's more complex. So it's something that goes on for a little bit longer. It's more of a structured song, and you can kind of break it down and listen to it and divide it up. And it also depends on the context of why the bird's making that noise as well, is what kind of categorizes it as song, which I'll come to in a minute. Calls are generally shorter noises. So there's something to communicate something very quickly, either to themselves or the birds around them. So it's generally either a contact call, so perhaps members of a flock. You'll hear this at night. If you go out in the winter and tilt your ears to the skies, you'll hear flocks of redwing going over, and they have this really high-pitched contact call that you can listen to. It's really cool to bird in the dark, in the darkness. It can be alarm calls, so basically, oh my God, a sparrowhawk, everybody quick, fly away. Or it can be in the nest and between a parent and its offspring, so begging calls, feed me, put that juicy fly in my mouth, etc., etc. And then other noises is something I've just started kind of reading about myself, but these are non-vocal noises that birds make, which sounds a bit silly, but a really good example is when a mute swan flies over your head and you hear those almost kind of like creaky wing noises. There's actually science to show that that's part of kind of the same purpose and the same reasoning as a contact call. So it's a noise that even though they're not physically making it out their beak, it's a noise that does help them communicate with each other. And several of the birds do things like this, whether it's beak clacking, whether it's clapping their wings together like wood pigeons, all of these things help communicate as well. So why do they sing? Well, one reason immediately is a territorial one. So birds will sing to establish a territory, bully the others out of it. So saying this is my patch. And it's also to do with courtship. So basically, look at me, aren't I sexy, aren't I beautiful? Let's get together and make some chicks. And it can be a combination of two of these things as well. So it really kind of ups the ante, especially in spring. So at the moment, well, we're technically summer now, aren't we? But it's still pretty busy in terms of birdsong. And the dawn chorus, we're just kind of getting to the lull in the dawn chorus now. It's slowing down quite a bit. So this is the phenomenon of a cacophony of birdsong you get very early in the mornings during spring. And there's quite a few reasons why birds do sing at dawn. And I find this really funny because ornithologists still argue about it. Nobody can agree. But there's multiple theories about why birds sing so early in the morning. So it shows off how fit you are. You can say, aren't I big and strong? I made it through the night. I made it through all that darkness and cold. I didn't get eaten by anything. And now I'm up at 4 a.m. singing. So isn't this amazing? Aren't I amazing? There's less noise competition. So they did used to think that sound carried further in the colder air, but I believe that's been disputed now. But there's actually less noise competition from our insect life because it's cooler in the mornings. Insects aren't on the wing, and there isn't that kind of background hum and thrum to compete against. So that's another theory. And there's just not really much else to do at 4 a.m. if you're a bird and you're awake. So yeah, it's too cold to feed. There's no food out yet. Those insects aren't active, as I said. It's a bit dark, so you can't really see much. So you're up and about, you might as well do something. Why not make that the time to sing and establish that territory and attract a partner? And how do they do it? Now, this is so complex, I don't think I can explain it very well, but birds are basically flying air sacs. They're flying bagpipes, glorified bagpipes with fancy feathers. And they have this amazing organ, and I don't know how to say it, syrinx, however you want. And it's basically the bird version of a voice box. And this absolutely amazing contraption within their kind of vocal area means that they can both simultaneously breathe and make noises at the same time. And it's a circulatory system. So rather than them breathing in and out like we do, the air constantly flows through a bird's respiratory system. So it's one of the most efficient systems in nature. And it means that amazing birds like the skylark can sing solidly for 20 minutes without stopping or appearing to take a breath. And it's absolutely fascinating stuff. So there's some incredible little valves going on in there, I think, that remind me a little bit of a pinball machine. So they can actually simultaneously make two noises at the same time, which is absolutely incredible. But I'll stop being geeky about that. So we'll learn some birdsong. I've got lots of little faces here. We're not going to learn this many, but some of the most common ones. And these are the order that I'd recommend kind of learning them in. Oh, I can't actually see what does it say behind "Are your best friend"?
Resources.
Resources. Your best friend. Couldn't remember. Sorry, my Zoom bar's at the top. So these are some really good resources that I recommend if you're getting into birdsong nerdery. Xenocanto is an amazing website that's basically a worldwide database of birdsong. Loads of British stuff on there because there's lots of bird nerds in Britain. And you can go on there and listen to calls, songs, variation, all sorts of stuff. It's really, really good. And there's also some on there that's freely available to download, so you can put it on your phone as a ringtone to help you teach yourself. The RSPB's website's pretty good. Every bird on there has some song pulled across from Xenocanto, but it's pretty good just to listen to. And the BTO have an amazing YouTube channel that have some really good comparisons of birds as well. So if you fancy getting really nerdy, that's some good places to practice. There's some various apps that I like to use rather than a bird book, because bird books are heavy, especially on hot days like today. And bird books don't contain song. They contain descriptions of song, but they make no sense to me. Words like tisk and chuk and seep just don't translate to how I learn. I like to be able to listen. So these apps are brilliant in that it's a bird book in your pocket and then it plays the song as well, and you can take it with you wherever you go. So I'd recommend this for learning. Just a side note is that you shouldn't really ever play birdsong in the field to attract birds, because it can make them waste energy. So if you do listen to it in the field, try and listen to it quite quietly. Collins one as well is really good if you get an extra nerdy. This one's got European species in as well. We'll skip over that. So some tips and tricks for learning birdsong is to start simple. Start with the really basic stuff you know you're going to hear and see all the time. So garden birds, the ones that sing earliest in the year, you know, some of them start piping, some sing all year round like the robin, and some will pipe up really kind of late winter, January, February, when there's only a couple of voices. So you're not going to overwhelm yourself. If you walk out into a woodland in early May, you're going to have an absolute nightmare if that's when you're starting to learn birdsong, because there's just so much about. And the loudest ones as well, so the ones that shout in your face and really make themselves known. I'd say practice as well. So as I mentioned, you can set birdsong as your alarm or your notification tone. That really helped me, especially with ones I struggle with. The only downside is if you hear that bird in the field for real, sometimes you reach for your phone, it kind of Pavlovian dogs yourself into, ooh, and you react and you realize it's a real red start, not my phone. And try and watch and listen simultaneously. So if you've not got binoculars, perhaps, you know, having to think about getting into birds visually as well, if you're not already, so you can see the bird as it's making the noise and basically link the two together. Finding your own style of learning is really important. Mine's really silly and that might not be for you, but it's stuff that sticks in my head. So find a thing that works for you and try and replicate it. Don't feel like there's a certain way to learn stuff. I like funny ways of remembering, as I said, but just try and, you know, if there's revision tricks that you use for exams, try and use that for learning. And some things to consider is that birds vary a lot. They're a pain in the bum. They do what they want and they will trick you. And to this day, great tits, I'm sure, Nick, you're the same, great tits still get me. I'm like, oh, this is a bird I've never heard before. I've discovered something incredible. And it's a great tip, being a pain in the bum. So yeah, some birds, this might not make sense, but some birds have a catchphrase. So they say the same thing again and again, and it's very repetitive. Whereas some birds are saying, you imagine them saying different words, but it's like learning a friend's voice. It's like knowing it's your friend, but they're saying different things. So some of them will literally just say the same word again and again, and you know it's that bird. And some, it's more about learning that tone behind it rather than what they're actually saying. I'm aware they're not saying words, but I like to imagine. The time of year, so as I said, some birds vary throughout the year as well, and also the time of year is really good to know what birds might be present and what not. You're very unlikely to hear things like a cuckoo in December. You never know, but you're very unlikely. So it can just help you narrow down. And the location comes in, here's that as well. So I'm not very likely to hear a nightjar in Birmingham city centre, for example. So learning the habitat and what you might expect to see there can also help you narrow it down. And I already said this, but birds are a pain in the bum. They will wind you up and yeah, baffle you regularly. So just be prepared for variation. Okay, number one, the blackbird. So this is obviously a very common bird. This is the one that one of the first ones I learned, and it's also one of the birds that starts singing earliest in the year. So we're going to have a listen to it in a second, but the tone of the blackbird is a very deep and melancholy kind of voice. It's really got that kind of richness to it. It's a really beautiful sound. They can sing at night, as goes the famous song. So this is a bird that if somebody sends me a video of something singing at nighttime, very occasionally it's been a nightingale, but it's either a robin or a blackbird. They're the two that tend to sing at, 2 a.m, 3 a.m, particularly in places with artificial light, like cities. And for me, it sounds like an old man whistling. So I like to imagine my granddad rambling around the garden, just pottering away, whistling to himself. And it's just that kind of mental image in my head. And it really helps. So it's probably one of the most human sounding whistles of a bird. And the structure of that song is that they sing for a little bit and then they have a pause, and then they sing for a little bit and then they have a pause, and they'll do that again and again as they get going. So if we have a listen, hopefully this comes through. Hopefully you can see what I mean by that. It's that kind of really deep melancholiness. Some of them have funny tunes as well. I've got one that sings I'm a Barbie girl. There's all sorts of really funny little songs and ditties they can put in there. Okay, next. How are we doing for time, by the way? Are we okay?
You're fine.
Yeah, good.
Great, thank you.
I've got no clock in front of me, so I'm a bit lost. So the second, possibly the most familiar bird in Britain, everybody knows it, it's the robin. And these guys are just never-ending songsters. They stop singing for a very short amount of time in kind of very late summer. And that's because they lose all their feathers and they look really quite hideous, quite frankly, when they molt their feathers. So they just kind of skulk away into the bushes because they're a little bit embarrassed and they don't want to be seen by anyone, or predated because they're a little bit vulnerable. So they stop singing, but they will generally sing all year round because they're one of the most territorial birds going. Their tone is sweet and lovely, a lot of people describe it as, which is, in my mind, perfect description for such a devilish bird. They are so cheeky and naughty and vicious. Quite frankly, they can be bullies, especially on the bird feeder, and with each other they can often fight to the death, but they come out with this angelic little tone that makes you think they're all lovely and innocent. Again, they can sing all night and they sing most of the year. And for me, the robin is really quite similar in structure to that blackbird, but it sounds like a little kid following Grandad round, imitating that whistle. So it's just that mental image to tie on top of the blackbird. So we've learnt the blackbird, we've taken that away, and now we're layering the robin on top. And again, like I said, that similar structure, it sings for a little bit, pauses, sings for a little bit, pauses. So we'll have a listen again. Ooh, it's gone on for a while there. So yeah, you can hopefully hear what I mean by that just lovely little sweetness, high-pitched little kid compared to the grandad. Next, we have the wren, troglodytes, troglodytes. What a little bird. Now, the number one feature of the wren, imagine this bird has little bird syndrome. It's one of the smallest and it's very angry about it. It actually holds the crown title of the most decibels per gram of any British bird. So it makes a hell of a racket. And that's one of the main impressions you get. If you're anywhere near a wren, it can actually slightly hurt your ears if you're very close to it. It just gets this burst of song coming out of the bushes. And that's a really key feature to listen out for. Live fast, sing loud. That's the wren's philosophy. And yeah, it's a very, very fast, high-pitched song. They're really kind of like rushing to get it out. And there's a very key feature in the song. So it's like a little rattle in the middle of it, a little scratchy bit. And that helps you narrow down pretty much with, all the other features, the fact that it's loud, the fact that it's fast, but the rattle as well means, you're definitely dealing with a wren. And for me, I like to imagine it's a wind-up toy. So you take that wren and you sit it down on the palm of your hand and you wind it up. And when you wind up a toy too far, and then when you let it go, it kind of loses itself and just completely loses control. That's what the rattle sounds like. It sounds like it's this tiny, ridiculously small bird is trying to get so much noise out so quickly that it loses control of itself. And it's just quite a nice image to remember. But other people like to imagine it's holding a tiny machine gun, and that's what the rattle is, which again suits a bird that can be quite angry and grumpy looking. So we'll have a listen and just really listen out for that little rattle machine gun in the middle. It's got the little at the end. And that's one definitely to practice, because once you pick up on it, you can never not hear it. It's all the time. And again, these are an extremely common bird. You hear them all the time, and they can sing for a lot of the year as well. So it's a really good one to get. The song thrush. Now, this one does what it says on the tin, quite literally. Song's in the name, baby. It's a song thrush. Now, for me, these sound like a load of birds just mushed together. It sounds like, I remember when the first time I consciously recognized a song thrush song, I was 13 and I was hanging up the washing. And I just heard this bird, and I remember going into my mum saying, "Mum, you've got to come and listen to this bird. It's absolutely mad. It's making loads of different noises." And it was a song thrush. So song thrushes I like to think of as being indecisive. So they pick a phrase, they pick a noise, and they'll repeat that noise 2, 3, or 4 times, maybe even 5 times. And then it kind of just gets bored of it and moves on to a new one. So it says like a few if you imagine it saying just, you know, random words, it says that word 2 or 3 times, moves on to the next. It says that one 2 or 3 times, moves on to the next. So if you think of it as being an indecisive impressionist, it's impersonating all different types of birds, but it gets really bored really easy. So we'll have a listen. There's really quite a muddle in there. There was also a chaffinch singing, which didn't help matters, sorry. But that's listening to birdsong in the field. Right, tits. We're going to cover some tits. So I've done 2 here because you encountered them all the time, both of them. And it's quite good to compare. So first of all, we're going to go for the great, which is a very common bird. You get it everywhere. It's got a 2-syllable song, of which, you know, there's a few birds in the UK that do. But this one, people like to say, it sounds like it's saying teacher, teacher, teacher. And that's just kind of to give you the pace of that song, the structure of it. I think it sounds like a squeaky wheel or an air pump, you know, like an airbed when you go camping. It's like pumping it up. And it's just a really squeaky noise. So let's have a listen. Kind of jolly, it's kind of skippy, it's kind of happy. And it sounds like it's saying, teacher, 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 teacher. So it should be quite an easy one to get. That said, great tits make all sorts of weird and wonderful noises. And like I said, they're a pain in the bum and they like to trick you. So bear that in mind. Next is the blue tip. These are tiny little birds and they have a suitably tiny little high-pitched voice that goes with them. They really come and shout in your face. They can be quite territorial. So you often get them very close to you as they're singing. And it sounds as though they're saying the words tea, tea, lily, lily, or tea, lily, lily, a mixture of these things, but there's 2 really kind of high-pitched words. Or I like to think it sounds like it's saying wee, wee, titty, as in like a small tit, because it's a small tit. And you can pick whichever one of these you like, but it just really helps you remember it. So we'll have a listen to that. So hopefully you can hear there, tee, 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 lily, 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 or wee, 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 tee, 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 tee. Both of those should be quite easy to get. And then I think this is the last one because I've been rabbiting on now, apologies. The chaffinch, and these guys are really easy to overlook. I find people often surprised when they start bird watching and see such a nice colourful pink bird in the garden, but they're quite skulky and they hop around on the ground a lot. But these guys have a really nice descending song. I say nice, it can get a bit annoying actually when they do it again and again and again. But it's always nice when the first chaffinch starts singing in the spring. So I like to imagine a waterfall when I'm talking about a chaffinch song, because it's this descending song that starts at a top note and makes its way down quite quickly. And at the very end, the flourish you've got to listen out for is like a little scratch, or you like to imagine that the chaffinch is blowing a raspberry, sticking his tongue out. And that's a really key feature to know that you're dealing with a chaffinch. So waterfall with a scratch at the end. Have a listen. You can hear that. Oh, cut it off. Mixing it up. There you go. So hopefully that's a nice mental image. Again, it's the kind of things that work for me. Oh, he's gone down the waterfall again. I don't know how I did that. And yeah, so that's a few little mini lessons. What I'd recommend is just having a go yourself. And this is something I've discovered this year. People are probably sick of me going on about this, but it's the best £2.79 I've ever spent. This is my mixing bowl and duster handle nailed together with a cheap £10 microphone put inside, and it's made a plant pot parabolic or a mixing bowl parabolic. And it's basically an amplifying dish that if you point it at a bird singing, it amplifies it. You can record it straight onto your phone, on your smartphone, and it's just been a really good way to help you learn birdsong. Just having it in my hand on a walk makes you notice it as you're walking around, because you're listening out for things. And it's really good to kind of build a collection of birdsong in your pocket as well. And you can make your own account on Xena Canto, and then you can become a recorder. It's great. So yeah, I'd recommend having a go at something like this if you really want to get stuck in. Oh, I've put some label in there. And that's it, I think. Thanks for watching.
Oh, that's brilliant, Lucy. Thank you so much. And a real kind of, I love the gadget at the end. I'm sure people will have a go at that. I mean, before I go to Nick, just to ask you, I mean, you have an enormous following on social media. I think you've got 21,000 on Twitter alone. And I just, talk to us a little bit about how you do your blogs and posts. Do you use a camera for Instagram? Do you just use your mobile phone? We've just seen your gadget. Does it take you a long time to put these together, or?
Not really, and this is where I feel like a bit of a fraud, because I should say, well, I do this and I do that, but I kind of stumbled into the world of wildlife comms because I've always liked wildlife. I got my first job with the RSPB, and it was a temporary contract, as these things tend to be. And about 9 days before my contract ended, I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma when I was 23. And so I thought, well, I can't really apply for new jobs knowing I'm going to have chemotherapy for 6 months. So I decided to take 6 months off and use it to volunteer. And that's when my Instagram kind of transformed from me on nights out with, pints and friends to a nature blog. And it wasn't really a conscious decision. It was just something it molded into. And I found a love. I'm not very good at anything practical. I'm not very good at anything scientific. I can't do maths. It makes me panic. But I can talk, as you can probably tell. And I just found that as a young 23-year-old, this was a subject I felt so much passion for. But in all of my peers and friends, it was something they just thought was just weird and nerdy, and it wasn't on the radar. And talking about it in a real human sense is what I'm really passionate about. We tend to take ourselves so seriously. And it's not how you talk to people when you're down at the pub over a beer and you're passionate about your thing that you love. You don't talk in a professional, stiff manner. You talk realistically. You might swear a little bit. You're funny. You're having a laugh. And that's what I try to do with my comms. So I mostly take photos on my phone. I work for a conservation charity, so I by no means have much money to buy fancy kit. But that's what it's about. It's about real connection and how real people can expect to engage with nature. And everyone's got a smartphone nowadays. So that's mostly what I use. And just talk like a real person. So yeah, that's about it. It's not very formal, sorry.
No, it's fantastic. I know my son's a primary school teacher, and that digital world and connecting young people with nature, as well as people who are already connected, is fantastic. I just wanted to ask Nick, with all that you do at the Wildlife Trust, we were talking earlier about untidiness and hedgerows and so on. I mean, we've lost half our hedgerows since World War II, and the hedgerows that we have left, something like 60%, are not very well managed. So just, what impact is that having not only on the bird life, and any bird life in particular, but bats and so on and so forth? And what can we do?
Well, that's two enormous questions. Hedgerows have been part of our landscape for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and they represent almost a portal back to a landscape that was here even further back in time. That about 5,000 years ago, in the Bronze Age, we began to fell the great woods that covered the landscape. Now, there's this myth that the woods were the same, or that a squirrel could bounce on trees right the way from Land's End to John O'Groats. Now, of course, we have different soils all over the country. We have different amounts of rainfall. We have different amounts of sunshine. And so here I'm in Norfolk. Lucy's in Norfolk at the moment, but Norfolk's my home. We are the driest county generally, and we have very sandy soils. And so we get drier than, for example, someone who lives in Cornwall, who's going to get more rain and has got soils that hold more rain. So forests were very varied, but from about 5,000 years ago, we began to chop them down. And it was about that sort of time that we began to keep livestock and also grow crops. And for both of those reasons, we needed hedges. And we needed hedges of thorny stuff to keep livestock in the places that we wanted it. Otherwise, you had to have someone who walked around with the livestock watching it the whole time, which is still very much the model all over the world. And you also needed hedges because fields were small. I mean, even up to my great-grandfather was a North Norfolk farmer, and his fields were tiny. And they were tiny because he wasn't using agricultural fertilizers. He was ploughing with horses, etc., etc. And so from 5,000 years ago in the Bronze Age up till my great-grandfather farming up to the start, let's say, of the Second World War, for a very long time, hedges were a surrogate for the woodland that we had right across the landscape, because we are fundamentally a woodland nation. As an island, we ought to be covered in woodland. It's not going to be the same kind of woodland everywhere. Some places will be dry, sandy birch woodland. Some places will be deep, dense, sessile oak woodland, which is very damp. But across the whole of the land, hedges represent, they're a surrogate for those woods. And they've been a corridor, not just in the sense that they're physical connections, but they're also allowing wildlife and genes to move across the landscape. And as you rightly say, in the 20th century, they were ripped out in a vast scale across the landscape. In the middle of the 20th century, suddenly there were tractors and there was a large amount of money for removing them. And so wildlife declined. And we have lots of the birds that Lucy's touched on, they're woodland edge species. And our gardens are great surrogates for woodland edge. But if you're a species that likes scrubby ground, like yellowhammers, whitethroats, bigger hedges for birds like blackcaps and lesser whitethroats and garden warblers. If you're those kinds of birds, and turtle doves, Lucy was saying she's seen her first turtle dove. The decline of the turtle dove across the UK has been followed very closely the decline of hedgerows, because turtle doves need broad, dense hedges in which to nest, because they're a bird of scrub. And we don't tolerate scrub because it's not agriculturally productive, and we don't anymore tolerate hedges. So we have removed tens of thousands of miles of hedges, and not just for birds, but for all the biodiversity that goes with hedges. This is a catastrophe. They're corridors for hedgehogs, they're corridors for dormice, which there's no record we ever had them in Norfolk, but other counties are luckier than us in having dormice, and they're corridors for all manner of other species. And of course, fields would traditionally have been far kinder places for wildlife. And I forget, it was at the beginning when we went live, or actually before we went live, Lucy was talking about scrubby areas at the base of hedges, because they're also hugely important. And they're not just important as habitat, connective tissue through the landscape. They're also important because we now farm in a very, very mechanical way. We farm in a very pesticide and fertilizer driven way, and hedges and the margins around the edges of the hedges, they're great for preventing the spread of our chemicals across the landscape. And that applies to our roads, which generate a huge amount of chemicals. It applies to our own lives, our daily lives, the driving around and all of the toxins that come from that. Hedges are absolutely fantastic for breaking up the wind and breaking up the spread of all kinds of noxious things that we humans produce, plus their habitat. And they're not just habitat, but they're also connective tissue. And if we're to survive, if our wildlife is to survive the climate crisis that we've unleashed, and also the biodiversity crisis that we've unleashed, we need connection across the landscape. It's all very well there being, I'm pointing in the direction of our wonderful Norfolk Wildlife Trust Foxley Wood. It's all very well there being Foxley Wood, where we've got early purple orchids, and we've got herb Paris, and we've got all kinds of incredibly rare and special things. But if they can't move with changing landscapes, then they're in trouble. And hedges are a brilliant surrogate. They're connective tissue through the landscape, allowing all the birds that Lucy was talking about, allowing all the other wonderful species to move, but also to share genes. And the sharing of genes leads to robustness. It leads to the ability to withstand change. And we humans have unleashed change on a terrifying scale across the landscape. So to come to your second question, what do we do about it? We need passionate people like Lucy. We need your good selves fighting so that farmers have an incentive And it's not just farmers, of course, it's gardeners, it's anyone who has control over landscape. We all need to put native species back in the landscape, across the landscape, and not just hedges, but ponds by the side of hedges, areas of arable margins, so that the wildlife that lived in all these things, 90% of ponds wrecked in or filled in the British farming landscape in the latter 20th century. That's absolutely shocking. And there's another reason turtle doves have gone. We need to reverse this idea of the soil as a dead, inert thing that just grows crops. We need to recognize that soil and the land are a living thing, and we need to keep it alive. And to do that, we need incentives on every scale. We need passionate, wonderful people like Lucy flying the flag. We need people like yourselves encouraging managers of the land across the landscape to put trees, to put hedges back into the landscape, to rebuild ponds. But we also need government, and we need ourselves right now, as the Environment Bill is being discussed and considered. We need to be shouting, we need to be knocking on their doors, writing to our MPs, because we're not powerless. We're absolutely not powerless. We're only powerless if we make ourselves powerless. So we need ourselves to make a lot of noise, which is what Lucy does so brilliantly and so passionately.
Oh, I can see your passion as well there. I mean, I know that the Climate Change Committee recommended that the hedges should, grow 40% in volume, or, we'll have an extra 200,000 kilometers of hedgerows. So we did a quick calculation in the Tree Council team, and if you take the entire UK population, that's 3 meters of hedgerow per head. If each of us plant and look after 3 meters of hedgerow, then on that front, we will make a huge difference. And that kind of feels manageable. And I think it's important as well in the cities. We see these rolling hedgerows in the countryside, but there's a lot you can do in the city. If you have a small garden, if you don't have a garden, to go out and, find us your local school, have some railings where a hedgerow could grow, or around the local sports pitches. There's real ways that everybody can get involved.
I completely agree with you, and all of us can have native hedge instead, for example, of having, I'm about to shudder as I say this word, but instead of having Leylandii cypress hedges, which are a thing of evil and in league with Beelzebub, we need to have native plants, because we have so many wonderful native species, but also we need them in the right place. And this is something that our powers that be, the authorities that control our landscape, that they very often don't understand. And so we've ended up in a weird, perverse place where incredibly ancient habitats like chalk downland or low nutrient heathland or low nutrient grassland, they are being ploughed up in order to plant trees. Now, in fact, that's a net loss for biodiversity and can be a net loss in carbon terms. So we need to be very strategic, and we need to learn that there was a moment, now I don't want to name and shame any particular politician, but there was a moment in the Brexit debate where Michael Gove said, the people are sick of experts. Well, we have experts for a reason, because they have thought and read and studied and published about their specialist subjects. So we need all to work together, to listen to one another and work together. And there's no reason why the shooting community, the farming community, the road building community, the nature conservation community, the tree hugging and bunny hugging community, why we can't all work together, because we have a common interest in having oxygen and water and a quality of life that's brought by the wonderful clattering of a chaffinch and the cuckoo that I could hear just as our webinar began.
Yeah, you're so right. I can see that we have some questions from our lovely audience here, and Fiona Lunn has asked, I'm going to ask Lucy this: do blackbirds repeat their song or calls, or is every song and call different?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there's small amounts of variation, but like I said, the blackbird, you tend to find your local characters. So they have a very kind of recognizable voice. I don't know if you agree, Nick, but like I said, I've had one that used to sing the first line to Kanye West's Gold Digger. That one that goes do, 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 do. It just used to do that again. And then I'm a Barbie girl. And then I've got one near me that lives, there's a certain area of where I live that perhaps the police might frequent a little bit more often than others. And it does a police siren, which is amazing, again and again. So yeah, it's not necessarily a word for word repeat, but you tend to recognize your local voices that say something familiar each time.
I agree with Lucy that each individual blackbird is quite predictable, although they will incorporate new material. My local one imitates a bee eater incredibly well, to the point that when he started doing it, I would leap outside with my binoculars every time, and it drove me insane. But another thing, I love the fact that Lucy has different ways from me of remembering blackbird song. And all of the different songs, but for me, a blackbird, if people are struggling with blackbird, a blackbird sounds as if it's grabbed by the neck at the end of the song. It always ends very abruptly, so it goes that lovely whistling, grandad whistling, do 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 do, but then it always ends with a as if it's being grabbed by the throat. And so blackbird is very abrupt, whereas mistle thrush, which sounds quite similar, mistle thrush is an opera singer who's fading into older years and can't quite remember the song, but they're not really a hedgerow bird, they're a woodland and a parkland bird. But a mistle thrush starts with the same kind of tone, but it fades away quietly at the end. It goes, and it can't quite remember the words. It just drifts into none, whereas blackbird ends very, very sharply. So yes, they tend to repeat the same. The individual blackbirds tend to repeat the same song. And mine does a bee eater.
I love it. We're getting so many different characters coming out here. I love it. I've got Linda has put a question up. Nick, are you seeing an increase in people wanting to go on wildlife tours in recent years? The environment is becoming so much more important to people. Are more people wanting to get out there to see it?
I think so, and this is a double-edged sword in a way, in that it's absolutely brilliant, and of course it is fundamental for a whole range of reasons. It's a circular thing, that not only do we need people who are passionately committed to wildlife and watching wildlife and loving wildlife and managing their own gardens, their parks, their school grounds, etc. for wildlife, because if we don't have that, we ourselves are finished, because we depend on nature to provide everything that we are. But post-lockdown, for example, so I'm pointing northwards here towards my friends who manage the reserves at Holcombe, and to the west of them Titchwell, and to the east of them Clyde, and so on. And there's enormous pressure this year, and the last year was the same. People spilling onto beaches, people who've never owned a dog before but don't want to keep it on a lead, people who want to ride their horse on the beach, people who want to camp, people who want barbecues in very dry sand dune systems, and so on. So it's a double-edged sword. We need all of us to have a relationship with nature, both for nature's sake and for our own, because we're a species that evolved in nature. We're another species that lives in nature, that belongs in nature. We function best when we have a relationship with nature, but we all need to learn the ground rules so that we give all the other species an opportunity to exist as well. So yes, but there is more and more interest, and this is a fabulous thing, but we all need a level of basic ecological literacy and love, and we have become a nation, and indeed a species, which puts self first. I am the most important thing in the world, and my family, my dog, my right to go to the beach, my this, my this, my this. And we need just to go into nature with oh wow, what an enormous privilege, what an extraordinary opportunity to learn. How can this experience enable me to do, it's almost that JFK quotation, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask not what nature can do for you, but what you can do for nature. And that's my vibe really in my relationship with nature altogether.
Yeah, you're so right. I've got a question I'd like to ask Lucy. I spent 10 years with international orchestras, so Academy of St Martin in the Fields and the Royal Philharmonic, and I sat in many concert halls around the world, listening to the beautiful violin for Lark Ascending, Vaughan Williams, listening to the fantastic cello, that's the Swan, in Carnival of the Animals. And I was wondering, if we took two other instruments, say the trumpet and the flute, what birds would you choose to portray through those instruments?
Oh, the trumpet and the okay.
Or choose two others.
No, I'll go with trumpet and flute. I mean, literally, quite literally, cranes sound like trumpets when they fly over. So
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Oh.
The bird
I'm
that came to
taking
my
this
head
very literal.
was
So if
crane,
you're
and I
walking
heard
along-
crane 2 days ago.
yeah, so you can be walking along and hear like a ha ha ha. That's terrible impression. Very badly played trumpet. And for me, fluty, the word that comes to mind, and I've just noticed somebody asking about the bird in the chat, fluty is a willow warbler. They're just this most fluid, liquid waterfall of flutiness. And I think, yeah, little brown job, so easy to overlook, but the song is just beautiful. It's one of my favorites. And yeah, fluty is just, as soon as you said it, I was like, willow warbler. So does that answer it?
It does, and we have the challenge from Geraldine, which we can give to both of you actually. Can you please describe the song of a wood warbler and a willow warbler and the difference between the two? And maybe Nick could even sing the song, or one of you could.
They're entirely different. Willow warblers. So earlier, Lucy was talking about willow warbler going down the scale, and I'm incredibly privileged that I hear willow warblers from my bed. They sing just there. And willow warbler, Lucy was talking about chaffinch. Chaffinch goes down the scale, but chaffinch is damn determined to get to the bottom note, and it has more or less 3 phases. It goes chink, and it hits the bottom with a loud crash or a splash, and it's going for that last note, whereas a willow warbler really doesn't care. In the most laid back, languid, fluty, as Lucy says, way, it just goes down the scale going tweet 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 tweet, and it lilts down the scale in the most relaxed and beautiful way. Wood warbler is altogether different, and wood warbler really is most associated with damper, denser, sessile oak woodlands in the west and in the north. And wood warbler is, I mean, it's described, I don't really get this, but it's described as a coin spinning on a table. It gets faster, and to me, wood warbler, it goes, and then it does this lovely trill at the end. It does do some fluty notes as well when it's really, really going, but the main song is that like that.
Yes. Perfect. I don't think I'd add anything to that. Yeah, I get the coin thing. I understand that visually in my head. So you imagine when you put a pound coin on a top and spin it, and it kind of spins, and then as it tips, it goes like, doesn't it, faster and faster? And that's what it sounds like. It kind of, yeah, it goes, like you said, high pitch. And in between, it's got those little like, pew, 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 pew. I don't know how you describe that. And then, yeah, willow warbler's just lazy, hot summer day, fluty down. Like, yeah, like you said, a chaffinch is going down the rapids of a waterfall. A willow warbler's going down a nice little slow patch. It's still going down, floating down a nice babbling brook almost, less than a waterfall, but going down like doo, 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 doo. Lovely, lovely.
Oh. Alan is asking, what's your favourite hedge species? By which I think he probably means your favourite bird species in the hedge. 2 of you.
I love a yellowhammer. I can't get enough of yellowhammers. I think they're just cracking. I think they're just brilliant little things. Excellent song. They're singing about cheese. That's always a winner. I'm saying that as a vegan, but I miss cheese. And they're just, yeah, what a gorgeous colour. When you get the sun hit a male yellowhammer on a May day when the hawthorn's still that really bright green, it's not kind of hardened yet, it's still fresh leaves, and there's blossom there, and he's throwing his little head back and singing his little song, just divine.
I'm with Lucy. I confess that yellowhammers are very much part of this North Norfolk landscape. Also a vegan, so he can't sing about cheese to me, but that wonderful and there's sort of almost a sad squeakiness to that last note. They're fantastic things, but I also love a whitethroat. Whitethroat to me is a bird that writes to the Daily Mail every weekend to complain about something. It's got this it's a snotty, angry little bird. Not classifying anyone who writes to the Daily Mail every weekend as snotty and angry, obviously, but a whitethroat's got a real nark about it. It's a cross little bird, whereas a lesser whitethroat is all very languid. If you took the song of a chaffinch and you put it horizontally, you'd end up with the song of a lesser whitethroat, which instead of going down goes along, and they're lovely birds. You don't tend to see them. Whitethroats are exuberant and they leap out of the top of the hedge, whereas lesser whitethroats stay densely in the hedge and they sing horizontally. Birdsongs have shape for me.
So interesting, we were talking earlier about the turtle doves, and I wondered, are bird enthusiasts like the fishing fraternity, in that you have the one that got away, the special one that you've always wanted, but you just missed it, or you never have quite got it, which seemed to be, you were saying, Lucy, it's the first time you got your turtle dove.
Yes.
Have you each got a one that got away?
I think it depends if you twitch or not, like officially twitch, because then it, any rarity that turns up, if it's a rare bird, that can very easily become the one that got away. If you dip it, is the language you say. So if you dip a bird, it means you missed it, didn't see it. I don't really twitch unless something's like turning up, 5 minutes down the road. So I just have a general life list of British species that I try and see. So up until this morning, turtle dove was on that list, and I finally got it. So I call them embarrassing birds that is embarrassing that I've not seen it. And up until recently, turtle dove and little owl are on there, but I've got both of those, so I'm not sure what's left. Probably something really. Oh, capercaillie. I've never seen a capercaillie. I've seen a dead capercaillie. I've never seen a live capercaillie.
How about you, Nick?
I've been watching birds for a very, very long time. I started as a child, and so and had the enormous privilege of growing up in North Norfolk, and so there's not really anything that got away in that way. And I've also come to a place where I don't need to see. I'm very happy sitting in my garden watching hairy footy flower bees, or I have Megachile willoughbyella willoughbees, leafcutter bee nesting in my bee block in the back garden just here. I don't have any, there's no need for anything. What nature sends my way is 3,000 times enough. So there's no sort of acquisitiveness about it. I feel blessed by everything that I see. So my reed warbler, who sings on the village pond outside my house, is just joy, and I lie in bed listening to him singing at night, and it's just bliss.
Oh,
exactly. Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's go to a spot and see what you see and just love it. Or just a messy verge at the side of the road and just crouch on your haunches and just watch for 10 minutes and see what emerges. And you'll see something new most times that you've never seen before. And yeah, it's almost as though when you start looking, you've got to just give the wildlife time to forget that you're there, and it comes back out, and you just, like you said, I could lose myself in a beat. Well, I have done. I watched a spider hunting wasp drag a spider down a hole for an hour and a half the other day. But it was just magic. It was perfect. There's little moments in nature. It's so much drama. Just because it's miniature doesn't mean it's not dramatic. So little Attenborough documentary right under your nose.
Judy's asked a question. Which hedgerow species are most at risk, and in which parts of the country? Do you have any thoughts on things that are particularly at risk?
Numerous, sadly. Turtle doves are absolutely plummeting, and turtle doves need three things really to do well. They need thick hedges. They need hedges that are several meters across, 2-3 meters across, of the kind that really don't exist anymore. They need ponds, and they need ponds with shallow edges with clear ground, because they don't like to drink where they don't have a good view. And they also need fallow fields through the winter with weeds growing in the springtime, so there's food for them. And all of those were abundant up to the Second World War. They were the way we farmed, and they've all just vanished, and so they've completely disappeared. So they're doing very, very badly indeed. But in older, bigger hedges like that, nightingales also, and nightingales, they're still common in southeast England, but 10 miles from here, where I grew up listening to nightingales, there are no nightingales now. There are no North Norfolk nightingales gone, which breaks my heart that we've lost that gorgeous bird. Corn buntings also, they're more a bird of particular farmland landscapes, but they're very much a farm landscape bird. Tree sparrows in many landscapes have vanished as well, and it's catastrophic. And somebody's commenting, Anthony Mills, I believe, is commenting, except at NEP, and that's true. And yes, it is fabulous, because what NEP has done is allow scrub to come back, but in the context of the loss from hundreds of thousands of turtle doves in the British landscape up until the First World War, the 10 singing turtle doves at NEP are a triumph, and they're brilliant, but it's a minuscule triumph, and that's no disrespect to NEP. It's a judgment of the rest of the landscape.
Yes, the size of the problem. And I think even without picking on those individual species, I think, what a lot of people say to me is, well, why do we need to save these things? Why do we need to save turtle doves, corn buntings, nightingales? Because let's face it, if the UK sank tomorrow, there's probably not, unless there's some obscure beetle species and some small insects, there's nothing here that doesn't exist in the rest of the world. We don't have any species completely, is it endemic? Is that the right word? My brain's saying pandemic. Pandemic out. But yeah, and this is the thing, is it's not just those species. Yes, they are red listed in the UK. Yes, they've declined by 70%, 80%, 90%, whatever. But if we lost the turtle dove tomorrow, turtle doves aren't going to go extinct in the world. It's very sad. But the abundance, you use that word abundance, Nick, it is the abundance of life. And those things living in those hedgerows might not be rare, but their numbers and their abundance and their spread is declining. And when you've not got those corridors and that texture and structure in the landscape, things can't move across it, and it really just reduces the resilience. And it's just not good for us. We're expected to be able to keep drawing resources out of this earth, out of the soil. We keep wanting to plant it with things, and yet we're doing nothing to replenish it naturally. Of course, we're doing stuff to replenish it artificially, and that's a nightmare. But yeah, if you think of things like hedgerows, just as they've been compared to road networks before, haven't they? Which is a horrible anthropomorphizing of hedgerows. But for things like bats, you know, moving through the countryside, where are they going to hunt? Recently, I watched a barn owl hunting over a grassy meadow. It swooped down, it got a vole. And then when it went back to its barn where it was nesting, it uses the hedgerow as a guide, drops down really low to it. It won't fly out right across the field where it's vulnerable, really low to the ground, and it uses that hedgerow as a guide, flew back to its barn. And yeah, it's as much about the abundance of the common stuff and the fact that it's not there anymore. We've seen this crash in insect populations. And although they might not be going extinct as a species, their numbers are just plummeting. And that for me is really, really terrifying.
So we're getting to the end of our conversation. If I could put you in a room with the leaders at COP26 in the autumn, and you had the right to ask them for one really big thing, and then you could ask our audience with us now for one small practical thing, what would the really big thing be that you'd ask those leaders to agree? And what would you like those who are listening now to do?
Wow. Do you want to go first, Nick?
Gosh, that's a mighty one. I think actually I might ask, rather than ask them to do something, I might ask them to reflect on something, which is, if we continue on the path that we are on, and this is not, much of the press dismisses environmentalism as woke and lefty and vain and all sorts of things. It's very, very easy to do that. The evidence that we are on a climatic and biodiversity path towards our own extinction potentially is overwhelming. And anyone who doesn't believe that, I encourage you to read some of the overwhelming body of scientific evidence about how much we depend on a healthy climate and a healthy landscape and healthy soils and healthy water. It is overwhelming. It is truly, truly terrifying. So I would ask people at the Conference of the Parties to reflect on what their great-grandchildren would say to them about what they did in the face of the evidence, and the reasons that they didn't, which is apt to be who votes for me or who funds my political party. And if your great-grandchild would judge you for that, then you really ought to be thinking about what you're doing. And then what was your say, Sarah? I'm awfully sorry.
If anything you wanted to suggest that our fabulous audience
does. I have a suspicion. Yeah. I have a suspicion that anyone who is participating will probably already be doing all of this stuff. But read books like Dancing with Bees by the gorgeous Bridget Strawbridge Howard. Read anything by Dave Goulson. And Dave Goulson is incredibly inspiring because he, as a scientist who studies this terrifying collapse of insects, he passionately and positively believes that we have control over our own tiny plots, and our own tiny plots can be as biodiverse and as bioabundant as we make them. And where we have control, we need to exercise that control positively. And one final thing I would say, actually, we need to stop being British. I was raised to be terribly apologetic about everything and never offend anyone and never upset it. And I have no desire to offend or upset anybody, but we have reached a stage years and years beyond which I'm going to be polite to people because I feel I ought to, when I'm going to say, I'm going to spend my life doing everything in my power to scream at people that we are hurtling towards a catastrophe. And if that makes me enemies, I don't wish for enemies. I have no desire to be inimical to anyone. Nonetheless, we're way beyond the time where we can afford to be polite. Be less polite, be greener, read Dave Goulson.
Yeah. I must say I'm turning into the, you know, the person who says things to people. I stopped a family in the road who were sitting there with the car engine running, with doing all sorts of stuff, and when I came back it was still there running, and I just said very gently, you know, do you realize what you're doing? And you know, and I'm terribly sorry, but I think sometimes you do have to speak out. I also saw somebody today laying a plastic lawn, and I'm just like, oh no, what are you doing? You know, so yeah, speaking out. Yeah. Any final words from you, Lucy, before we close?
I was just going to say, in a very quick answer to the questions that you asked, at the COP summit, I think one thing I'm desperate to see, without sounding like some kind of anarchist, is the decapitalization of the climate movement and the biodiversity movement, in that we're trying to consume our way out of a consumption crisis. It's not going to work. And people are trying to solve the climate crisis with technology and growth and new sectors and green jobs, and let's build loads of turbines. And this is all stuff that has to come out of the ground and cost energy. Whereas we could simplify our lives, stop buying so much stuff, nobody needs Primark, and just live a life where we're healthy, we have access to education, our lives are enriched, we're close with nature. You know, it's an equal society, and we just don't get to fly to Ibiza 3 times a year. I'm sorry, but you're still a very happy person. And I'd say with individuals is just exactly that. Just embrace the joy of a simple life, of clothes with holes in and local veg, and eating carrots for 12 weeks in a row because that's the seasonal veg, and you get really creative with it, and not flying, like you said. You know, if it's a really special occasion and you enjoy it, and if you buy meat and fish and cheese, have it every now and then, and it's so much tastier somehow, and just really love just winding it all back and then finding that joy with the nature on your doorstep. That's what I'd say.
Good words, very good words. So this is you know, that's been a fantastic, super nerdy conversation that's inspired us all, and we've all heard some incredible new sounds and seen new images, ways of visualizing the things that we're hearing, which I found fascinating. I'm sure everybody else has as well, and we're all going to be out there tomorrow morning listening with new ears and looking with new eyes. So thank you both so much for joining us, for giving up your evening, and for all the hard work you do in preparing. And thank you to our audience for being with us as well. This will be available as a recording, so if you came in part way or you missed, would like to share it with friends or family or so on, there will be a link to it before too long. We've got our final conversation tomorrow evening with Jonathan Drury, best-selling author, new book, Around the World in 80 Plants, and he's talking about plants and humanity, and he's a great speaker. So do join us then as well if you'd like to, and join us in Talking to the Hedge, which is our Hedgerow campaign. If you post on social media, if you do hashtag Talk to the Hedge, we've got some really delicious presents and prizes for the hedgiest pictures, so have a go. And finally, if you've enjoyed this evening and you'd like to pledge a hedge, do the 3 meters or the 1 meter for your family. If you go to our website, which is nationalhedgerowweek.org.uk, then you can make your pledges there, and you can find lots of other useful and exciting information as well. So thank you again to our really, really amazing panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you to Louise and Dom, who've helped make this evening the success that it is. And thank you to you, our wonderful audience. And we all wish you a very happy rest of the evening. And yeah, goodbye and thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.